What would you do if you discovered that someone you thought was dead for years reappeared in circumstances more macabre than you could imagine? To know the whole truth behind this story, stay until the end. Reality can be scarier than you think. It was a sunny July 5th, 2012, when a Woodbridge police dispatcher in Rivertown County received a disturbing call. The owner of a home on Maple Avenue that she had rented for years reported a disturbing discovery. She had gone to clean the house after the recent move of tenants, but what she found in the backyard was more than just a surprise. An unusually heavy garbage container that the garbage collectors had refused to take away. The curious owner decided to inspect the contents. As he opened the lid, a foul stench filled the air, and as he looked inside, he saw something that looked like a human limb. Horrified, she called the police immediately. Officers arrived quickly and conducted an initial investigation. Inside the container, they found the body of a woman in an alarming state. He was wearing only his underwear. His eyes were covered with a sleep mask, and his body was wrapped in plastic and stuffed into a sleeping bag. Investigators began to closely examine the container's exterior surface for clues. After securing the scene and completing the necessary procedures, the body was transported for further investigation. A search of the house did not reveal much as it had been recently cleaned, but in the garden shed they found a mattress with a large stain that looked like Veranoside Pomenta had been drunk. Oxer took Scubaris chirped like Shermasianras, one-eyed hurriedly with paint. Experts suspected that someone had tried to hide something significant. In addition, they discovered a piece of plastic with suspicious traces that was sent for further analysis. Before I continue with this chilling story, I want to pause briefly to ask you for something important. If you really enjoy dark and disturbing stories like this, be sure to subscribe to this channel. But it is not just a suggestion. If you are a true lover of mystery and crime, you know that you cannot miss what comes next. Subscribe now to make sure you don't miss out. Back to the story. Investigators focused on finding out who had lived in the house in recent years. How long were they there? Where had they gone? They also wanted to find out if the woman found in the dumpster was in any way connected to the property. A disturbing detail emerged during the autopsy at the woman's mask was found damaged, especially on the right side. The state of decomposition of the body, combined with the damage to the mask, made it difficult to obtain clues, but samples were taken to try to determine his identity. When comparing the medical records of former residents with the test results, the owner mentioned that a Claire Morgan had lived there a few years ago. Investigators compared Claire's medical records to the autopsy results and discovered that the woman found was, in fact, Claire. However, the owner of the house insisted that this was not possible. According to her, Claire had died 3 years earlier due to a brain aneurysm. No one knew the exact circumstances of his death, and this fact had never been officially confirmed. Medical examination revealed no signs of natural causes in Claire's death, including the suspected brain aneurysm. Instead, they found an injury on the right side of her face, just below the eye, affecting both soft tissue and the skull. Experts suspected that this injury was what caused his death. According to the medical examiner, a person with such a wound would die in less than 30 minutes without immediate medical attention. Police contacted Claire's relatives in Canada to inform them of the gruesome discovery. The news was devastating for them, as they were convinced that Claire had died 3 years ago. In addition, her husband Jonathan had given them an urn that supposedly contained her ashes. Upon learning that Claire had not died naturally, her family was deeply shocked. having spent 3 years grieving. In an attempt to assist the investigation, Claire's family handed over her personal records to investigators, who felt it was crucial to understand who Claire was, how she lived, and what she may have experienced in her final years. Claire Morgan's story began in Canada's Wet'suwet'en, where she was born and raised. In search of new opportunities, he moved to Australia in 2000. Acquaintances described her as a cheerful and sociable person. Shortly after arriving, he began working at the luxurious Majestic Hotel in Sydney. It was there that he met Jonathan Parker, a British chef. Their relationship quickly grew deeper, and in 2005 they decided to get married. The couple worked together at the prestigious hotel, and from the outside, their relationship seemed strong and harmonious. Unfortunately, investigators were unable to speak to Jonathan, as his whereabouts remained a mystery. Meanwhile, the forensic team was faced with a major enigma. Sickler had been absent for 3 years. Where he had been all this time. This investigation significantly changed the course of the investigation. Experts not only identified the crime scene, but also determined where the remains could have been found after the incident. If they had remained under normal conditions for 3 years, the degree of decomposition would have been much greater. Experts suspected that a cold room might have been used to preserve the body. In search of new clues, investigators questioned neighbors. One day, they walked into a local store and talked to its owner. It turned out that the owner knew Jonathan well, a Briton who visited the store frequently. The man said he had last seen Jonathan about 2 weeks ago. During their last conversation, Jonathan mentioned that he was planning to travel abroad to visit his parents and offered to sell them his freezer. The owner bought the freezer for $30 and delivered it to his brother, who owned another store nearby. However, the brother did not use the device because of an unpleasant smell. Investigators began to suspect that the freezer might be linked to Claire's disappearance. The refrigeration equipment was sent to experts for a thorough examination. Meanwhile, investigators dug into Claire's personal records, revealing an unexpected aspect of her married life with Jonathan. It turned out that Claire had discovered her husband's infidelity with a colleague at the hotel. She was furious, but Jonathan managed to convince her that it had been a mistake and that it would not happen again. Claire decided to give him a second chance, assuming they needed more personal space, and so she left the hotel. However, Jonathan soon returned to his old ways and began a new relationship with another employee. Despite everything, Claire expressed in her diaries a deep love for her husband and was willing to fight for her marriage at all costs. The diaries helped investigators understand that the Huang's couple had problems, but Claire believed in a future together. It was now crucial to determine when Claire was last seen in good health. A friend recalled a meeting 3 years earlier, on September 18, 2009, when they had dinner at a Thai restaurant. Claire paid the bill with a check. To determine the exact date of the incident, experts performed a special analysis of the stomach contents, which revealed traces of Thai food coinciding with Claire's last meal. This date became a key point in the investigation. Investigators made disturbing discoveries while examining evidence at May's home. Avenue. Under a layer of paint on the mattress, they found traces of blood that they were able to attribute to Claire in their number and arrangement. They suggested the incident could have happened while she was in bed, possibly asleep or in a helpless state. Experts also found biological traces inside the freezer, leading to suspicion that the device had been used to hide Claire's body for some time. At the same time, investigators were trying to locate Jonathan Parker. Neighbors reported that he had left the house loading his belongings into a rented van. Before leaving, Jonathan asked a neighbor to take out the trash can, as he would not have time before the garbage truck arrived. Investigators contacted the company that provided the van and discovered an interesting detail. 2 weeks ago, this vehicle was caught on camera on the road to Port Clifton. This led to suspicion that Jonathan might have left the country, but his exact whereabouts remained a mystery. To advance the search, the police decided to ask for help from the media. They felt this was an effective way to capture public attention and report on the search for Jonathan Parker. Then, something unexpected happened. After a day of absence, Jonathan contacted the authorities himself and offered to return to Australia to speak with investigators. Upon arrival at the airport, he was immediately detained. In connection with Claire's death on July 19th, 2012, Jonathan shared his version of events for the first time. According to him, an argument broke out between them on the evening of September 18th, 2009. The reason was allegedly a trivial dispute over household chores, and, according to Jonathan, Claire became aggressive. She pushed him, and in response he pushed her to try to calm the situation down. However, the argument continued to escalate. Jonathan claimed that Claire hit him in the shoulder with a sharp object, and in an act of self-defense, he grabbed a cast-iron skillet and hit her in the face. According to him, Claire fell to the ground and stopped moving. He said he did not know what to do at the time, so he decided to hide the body. The next day, he purchased a freezer and placed Claire's body inside of it, leaving it in the garden shed. He meticulously cleaned the house and made sure to leave no trace of the incident. To explain Claire's sudden disappearance, Jonathan fabricated a story about her passing due to a sudden illness. He even held a fake cremation ceremony, presenting Claire's family with an urn that it was supposedly found inside his ashes. During the ceremony, she dropped her wedding ring into the urn to lend further credibility to her story. After this, he returned to his normal life in Australia, apparently convinced that the worst was over. When the truth finally came out, Jonathan confessed to his involvement in his wife's death, but insisted it was an accident and that he acted in self-defense. 2009 probably thought the most serious charge he would face would be reckless injury, not considering that investigators had the results of an exhaustive investigation that told a very different story. On the eve of the expiration of his detention period, investigators presented Jonathan with the results of reports that contradicted his statements. According to authorities, Jonathan waited until Claire fell asleep and then attacked her with a heavy object, leaving a visible mark above her right eye. This fact explained the damage to the sleep mask specifically in that location. When Jonathan heard these assumptions, his behavior changed abruptly, becoming more irritable and uncontrollable, frequently interrupting the investigator and vehemently denying his involvement in the incident. While Jonathan's interrogation continued in Australia, a thorough search was carried out at his home in Greece, where he had moved after the incident. The research team spent several days meticulously examining and documenting all potentially significant objects in the house. During the search, investigators found a box containing several records, invoices, and transcripts of phone calls. Jonathan turned out to be very meticulous in preserving these documents, and everything was carefully arranged. The specialists analyzed the records to find out who Jonathan had been communicating with in the days leading up to the incident with Claire. Investigation of incoming and outgoing calls led to an unexpected discovery. It appeared that Jonathan was developing a relationship with another woman also employed at the hotel. The tragic incident with Claire occurred on the eve of Jonathan's birthday, September 18th. Analysis of the phone calls revealed that Jonathan had booked a table at a restaurant for the evening of the 19th, his birthday. That day, he called a taxi for himself and his companion. They enjoyed champagne and dinner, and then headed to Jonathan's apartment, where they spent the night in the same place where the tragedy with his wife had occurred the day before. Jonathan Parker's trial began in November 2013. Jonathan persisted in his version of self-defense, claiming that Claire had attacked him first with a sharp object. However, the sciences argue sand. Circumstances in which Claire was found in an inappropriate location with a sleeping mask over her eyes contradicted her claims. He pleaded guilty to reckless injury and obstructing proper care to the victim, hoping to avoid a harsher sentence. The difference between a charge of intentional and reckless injury was significant in terms of sentencing. In the first case, it meant life imprisonment. In the second, only 1 or 2 years in prison. Jonathan's phone records indicated an extramarital affair, leading investigators to suspect that this could have been the trigger for the family drama. To convince the jury of Jonathan's intentional actions, the prosecution introduced into evidence the cast-iron skillet allegedly used as a weapon. An experiment showed that for a woman of Claire's build, it would have been extremely difficult to lift the frying pan, let alone use it to attack. For Jonathan, a former chef familiar with such kitchen utensils, it would have been a piece of cake. The most convincing evidence, however, was the sleeping mask found over Claire's eyes, which in no way matched Zweitausendein's self-defense version. During the trial, the jury was presented with an unusual item, a sleeping mask. Meanwhile, the prosecution presented the findings of investigators who found special markings on the mask. These prints surprisingly matched certain injuries on Claire's face and the shape of a kitchen utensil, indicating that the mask was on her face at the time of the fateful incident. In addition, a mattress was found in an adjoining room with traces that could be attributed to Claire. These facts suggested that the young woman was in a state of rest when Jonathan committed the irreversible act. Investigators also concluded that the injuries Jonathan allegedly received from Claire were actually self-inflicted, likely in an attempt to bolster his version of events. The totality of the evidence presented in the courtroom was sufficient for the jury to return a verdict of guilty. As a result, Jonathan Parker received the maximum sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now he expects to spend the rest of his days behind bars, paying for the macabre act he tried to hide. This is how this disturbing story ends. If you've made it this far, it means you're really passionate about these stories, so don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of the mysteries that are coming up. See you.